He fired me in less than 15 minutes. No warning, no discussion, just a cold statement and a wave of the hand right before security escorted me out of the building my father and I spent decades building together. What Ethan didn't know that morning was this. While he was busy redecorating Dad's office and rewriting our dealership's playbook, I had already taken a job that would change everything. And by the end of this story, you'll see exactly how I turned the tables without ever raising my voice. My name is Troy Matthews. I'm 41, and until that Monday morning, I was the senior sales director at Matthews Auto, a family-owned dealership in Sacramento, California. For 16 years, I helped grow the business from the inside out to training every salesperson, shaking hands with every returning customer, and hitting every sales goal without fail. That dealership was my life. My father started it with 10 used cars and a busted sign on a dusty lot. I carried on that legacy. My younger brother, Ethan, he studied business and returned with big ideas, optimization, profit margins, turnover rates. The moment Dad handed him the keys, everything changed. Ethan had only been owner for 3 days when he fired me. He called my approach too soft. He wanted hard numbers, fast deals, a clean slate. No more handshakes or follow-ups, just volume and speed. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just walked out with my cardboard box past the showroom I helped build and into a future Ethan couldn't see coming. As I set the box on the hood of my truck, my phone buzzed a message from Titan Motors. The meeting was still on. I smiled. Ethan may have fired me, but he had no idea I was about to become the man who controls his entire inventory. And that's when things started to get interesting. The dealership hadn't even opened yet. The sun was still low behind the rows of gleaming windshields, but I was already outside holding a cardboard box with 16 years of my life stuffed inside. I didn't bother looking back through the glass again. I'd already seen enough Ethan standing behind Dad's old desk, like a CEO in a showroom throne. The family photos removed his replacement, already waiting in the wings, a guy barely out of grad school with slick hair and louder shoes. It was surreal. Not the kind of surreal you feel when something magical happens, but the kind that guts you from the inside, the kind that makes you question everything you built your life around. And yet, despite the hollow sting, I wasn't angry. Not yet. There's a moment right after a major blow, just before the pain sets in, when everything goes numb. That's where I was. Numb, not sad, not furious, just still. Ethan had said I was too soft. That was his word. Said we needed aggressive numbers, not relationships. As if the thousands of families who trusted us to sell them safe, reliable cars over the years didn't count. As if knowing a man's name, his kids' names, and how his wife beat breast cancer last fall didn't matter. As if following up after the sale offering real service was just wasted time. But I wasn't going to argue with him. He wasn't interested in listening, and frankly, I didn't need to defend myself. He'd already made his choice. What Ethan didn't know, and what made me feel calm despite everything, was that his choice would cost him more than he realized. Because while he was busy making cuts and crunching spreadsheets, I'd spent the last 2 weeks quietly working on something bigger. Something that would shift everything under his feet. 3 days before he fired me, I sat across from Jack Whitman, the vice president of sales at Titan Motors, our largest and longest-standing supplier. Jack's the kind of guy who remembers birthdays, who remembers what you drink in your coffee, who believes in shaking a man's hand before signing anything. We were sitting at a quiet booth in a corner diner. He slid a folder across the table without a word. Inside a distributor contract for the Western Territory, Titan's Western Region, 17 dealerships under one distributor, including Matthews Auto. "We want someone who knows the business, not just the numbers," Jack said. "Someone with real connections." "Why me?" I asked. "Because dealerships come and go," Jack answered. "But relationships, that's what keeps this industry alive. And no one in this territory has built stronger ones than you. That contract would put me in charge of all inventory allocation for every Titan-affiliated dealership west of Colorado. I would decide who got what when, and at what cost, within margins, of course. It was more than a promotion. It was leverage. It was freedom, and I knew I had to take it. Still, I didn't sign immediately. I brought the papers home, laid them on my kitchen table, and stared at them all weekend. I thought about Dad, about the way he used to stay at the dealership long after closing, just to talk to returning customers. I thought about the first time I sold a car on my own. I was 25. It was a 2004 Honda Accord to a single mom who cried when she drove it off the lot because it was the first car she'd ever owned in her own name. That was the business I knew. That was the business I'd devoted my life to. Signing the Titan contract felt like stepping away from that, but staying would mean standing under someone who didn't value any of it. Then on Friday, I walked past Ethan's office and overheard him on the phone. He didn't know I was outside. He was talking to someone from the bank. Once Dad's totally out of the picture, he said, "We're cleaning house. New sales team, new model. None of that hand-holding crap Troy does. He's good with people, sure, but he's behind the times. We're restructuring everything." That was the moment I stopped feeling numb. I walked straight to my office, closed the door, and signed the Titan contract. I scanned the pages and sent them off. "I'm in," I wrote. Jack called me 10 minutes later. "When can you start?" I told him I needed a week. In truth, I only needed 3 days to finish backing up contact lists, forward my files to a personal drive, and hand off enough daily tasks so no one noticed I was slowly detaching from everything. The severance check. Ethan gave me Monday morning. That was just a formality. He thought he'd cut me off from my future, but he had no idea I'd already secured something far more powerful. There was one thing left, the first meeting at Titan's regional office. I drove there directly after leaving the dealership. Jack was waiting. "Welcome aboard," he said. He showed me to a modest office, a desk, a computer, and a large wall map with dealership pins across California, Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, and Idaho. One of those pins, bold and red, was Matthews Auto, my former home, now part of my new territory. I studied it for a moment longer than the others. Jack walked me through the allocation process. I'd be managing inventory flow, prioritizing supply, and making decisions that would shape how every dealership in my region performed, including Ethan's. I would never play dirty. That's not who I am. But I also wouldn't pretend the world hadn't shifted. Later that week, as I sat in my new office running inventory simulations, my phone rang. The number was familiar. It was Vanessa from Matthews Auto, our longtime accounting lead. Her voice was hushed. "Troy. Shane. Ethan is losing it. We can't get our orders confirmed. The system flags everything for review." I leaned back in my chair calmly. "That sounds like a supplier issue." "It is. He tried calling Titan, but they're bouncing him around. Said you always handled the orders. Now they don't know who to talk to." "I don't work there anymore," I said gently, "but we've got customers waiting, the showroom's half empty." I felt it in my gut, the weight of good people stuck in a bad situation. Not for Ethan's sake, but for the rest of them, the folks who worked the floor, the techs in the garage. I considered reaching out, but not yet. There was still more Ethan needed to learn, and the phone call that followed made it clear he wasn't calling for help. He was calling for control. He just didn't know that control didn't belong to him anymore, not even a little. The voicemail was exactly what I expected, shouting disguised as professionalism. Ethan's voice was sharp, urgent, and just angry enough to mask the panic I knew he was feeling. "Troy, this is unacceptable," he snapped. "The system's blocking our inventory orders, and you know damn well why. Fix it. I don't care what your title is now. You messed something up, and you need to make it right." I didn't call him back. Not right away. I gave it a full 24 hours. Long enough for him to sweat, long enough for the showroom to get a little emptier, and long enough for everyone around him to start asking questions. When I finally returned his call, I kept my voice level and calm. "Matthews Auto." He answered, short and breathless. "Ethan, it's Troy. Got your message? About time. We need 16 units by Tuesday. The system won't approve anything. I've tried going around it. They keep redirecting me. This is ridiculous." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the map of the Western region pinned on my wall. "Have you spoken with your new Titan representative?" I asked. "They're useless. Nobody's giving me a straight answer. All I hear is that there's some new distributor. I don't have time for this. Just tell me what you did to our account." "I didn't do anything to your account," I said. I let the silence stretch just a little. Maybe I continued. "You should ask your regional distributor. That's what I'm trying to do. No one will tell me who it is." I looked down at the paperwork spread across my desk. "It's me, Ethan." Silence, heavy and immediate. "What are you talking about?" He said, voice now quieter, but tense. "I'm the new Western Regional Distributor for Titan Motors. All allocations, approvals, and supply management go through me now, including yours." Another long silence. I imagined him pacing, hand in his hair, disbelief written all over his face. "That's not possible," he said eventually. "You can't just—" "I didn't just anything," I replied. "Titan came to me. They knew you were planning to drop them. They valued the relationships our dealership had built, something you called outdated. So now you're holding our inventory hostage. That's illegal. It's business. Standard protocol. Your order is flagged for review. That's typical for new ownership." Ethan's voice shifted. Less anger, more calculation. "This is because I fired you. Come on, Troy, grow up. This is childish." "No," I said simply. "This is me doing my job." He tried to keep his tone cool, but I could hear the edge of desperation creeping in. "How long is this review going to take?" I glanced at my calendar. 2 weeks, maybe 3. That's the process. 3 weeks. We'll have an empty lot by then. "That's not my concern," I said. "You're a new owner. Titan wants to ensure allocations are going to dealerships that align with their standards. That includes relationship metrics, customer satisfaction, retention rates. You son of a— I'll review your application personally." I cut in, keeping my tone even. "Have a good day, Ethan." I hung up before he could respond. For a moment I just stared out the window of my new office. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something more complex, like standing in the aftermath of a storm you didn't start but were forced to finish. I knew what was coming next, and I wasn't wrong. Minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Dad. "Troy, what the hell is going on?" His voice was firm, not angry yet, but close. "Hi, Dad. I figured Ethan would call you. He says you're blocking inventory to the dealership." "I'm not blocking anything. I'm doing my job. Ethan fired me last week. I work for Titan Motors now. I'm the Western Regional Distributor." There was a pause on the line. I could hear him exhale, slow and heavy. "He told me you quit. Said you got a better offer and walked out." "No, Dad. I have the termination paperwork. He gave me 2 months severance. Called it professional courtesy." Silence again. I pictured him on the porch of that cabin up in Montana, holding the phone like it was a lifeline. I imagined the way his eyes narrowed when something didn't sit right. He'd trusted us both. He believed we'd take care of what he built. "Is this about getting back at him?" he asked finally. "No," I said. It's about doing things the right way. The way you taught us. You two are tearing the business apart. I gave it 16 years, Dad. I didn't start this, but I also can't watch him destroy what you built. You should know he was planning to drop Titan and switch to Nova Automotive. He didn't speak, but the air on the line changed. He'd heard of Nova. Everyone in the industry had. Their vehicles were cheaper, their service poor. It was the kind of move that looked good on paper for about a year, until customers stopped coming back. I didn't know, he said finally. You do now. There was a long pause, then a sigh. I'm coming home. We need to fix this. I didn't respond right away. There was too much still unspoken. If you've ever had to choose between loyalty and legacy, between keeping peace and doing what's right, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. As I set the phone down and turned back to the glowing screen in front of me, I noticed something, an email notification from Titan HQ. It was Jack, and it had one line, "We need to talk. It's about Ethan." Whatever came next, I had a feeling it wasn't going to be about inventory. The subject line on Jack's email read simply, "Your brother." It landed in my inbox an hour after I'd hung up on Ethan, and just minutes after Dad said he was flying home. Jack didn't usually mince words, and this wasn't the time for pleasantries. I picked up the phone and called him directly. He answered on the second ring. "Troy, glad you called. What's going on? I figured now's the time to tell you the rest." He said, his voice calm but serious. "Your brother approached us 3 months ago before the ownership transfer. Wanted to change suppliers." I sat up straighter. "You're kidding. Wish I was." He said Titan's prices were too high, our delivery too slow. Pushed us hard to cut 15% across the board, or he'd switch the dealership's inventory to Nova Automotive. That hit harder than I expected. "Nova?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yeah. We've seen it before. New owners trying to make a mark cut costs quickly. They want cheaper vehicles and flashier numbers for the first few quarters, but it never lasts. Customers catch on fast." I rubbed my eyes, piecing it together. Ethan hadn't just fired me. He'd intended to burn the whole thing down. What he called modernization was really short-term profit, dressed up as innovation. And it wasn't just reckless. It was personal. Our family's reputation, decades of loyalty and service, nearly tossed aside for a fast gain. Jack continued, "We knew your father wouldn't have approved the switch, and that's why we reached out to you. We didn't want to lose the Matthews relationship. We just wanted to keep it on the right side of the family." I sat in silence for a moment, taking it all in. My jaw clenched. Ethan wasn't just going to restructure the team. He planned to change the supplier, gut our values, then sell off the dealership once the books looked strong. Probably to a national chain. Fast profits, exit clean, and move on. If you found out your own sibling was planning to destroy your family's legacy for a quick win, what would you do? Would you step in? Or let them fail? I'd really like to hear your take in the comments. I didn't know I said. You do, now, Jack replied. And just for the record, his current application is still under review. What happens next, that's entirely up to you. He hung up. The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter. I leaned forward, stared at the pending order from Matthews Auto sitting on my screen, and let the weight of it sink in. All the years Dad spent building trust with customers, all the employees who treated that place like home. All of it was at risk, not because of incompetence, but because of ambition without values. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table poring over sales records and service satisfaction reports I had saved before leaving. I compared Titan inventory data with Nova's vehicle quality rankings. Side by side, the difference was obvious. Nova's cars were cheaper up front, but had twice the warranty issues. Their customer retention rates were 30% lower. I pulled the last 3 years of Matthew's Auto customer surveys. Over 80% of our repeat business came from customers buying Titan models. Our entire reputation was built on quality and loyalty. At 500 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. I made a pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and started drafting a proposal. It wasn't about blocking Ethan. It wasn't about revenge. It was about preserving something better. I spent the next 4 hours building a plan to transform Matthew's Auto into a flagship Titan dealership, one that offered exclusive inventory, high-end customer service, and premium financing options. I backed every decision with data. This wasn't personal. This was business done the right way. By 9:00 a.m. I had the full presentation. All I needed now was someone to see it who still cared about the heart of the dealership. Dad. I texted him, "Meet me at noon, Hector's Grill." He replied immediately, "Be there." At 11:30 I printed everything and headed out. I arrived early. Dad was already seated near the back, nursing a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked tired, not from the flight, but from the weight of watching his sons unravel everything he'd built. He got right to it. "Your brother says you're retaliating, that you're holding up inventory just to hurt him." I slid the termination paperwork across the table. He fired me on his first day. No warning. Dad picked it up, read it. His expression darkened. "He told me you left on your own." "Then I want you to see this," I said, passing him the second folder, quote from Nova Automotive, dated weeks before he signed over the business. He planned to drop Titan, the supplier you worked with for 35 years. His hands tightened on the paper. "These are from before I signed ownership over. He was going to fire me, switch to Nova Gut, everything you built, then sell the dealership. Sell," he whispered, eyes narrowing. I opened the final folder valuation requests from 3 dealership conglomerates. He was preparing it for acquisition. Dad sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. "I don't understand." "Why would he do this? Short-term profits," I said. "You boost numbers for a few quarters, make it look like a turnaround, then exit before the quality issues catch up." He stayed quiet, looking at the numbers, looking through the betrayal. I asked him gently, "Do you want to keep Matthew's Auto as a legacy, or watch it become just another name in a chain of used car lots?" He met my eyes. "I need time to think. Take the day," I said. "But Dad, we're not out of options. I have a plan, a way to bring it back the right way. You still own the property. That gives you leverage. You just need to decide how you want your name to be remembered." As we stood to leave, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something more serious, more urgent, like standing at a fork in the road where one path leads to memory and the other leads to meaning. And Ethan? He didn't even realize which road he was barreling down. Dad didn't say much after we left Hector's Grill. He just nodded, tucked the paperwork under his arm, and walked to his truck, like a man who'd just learned the house he built had a cracked foundation. I didn't press him. He needed space. But I knew something had shifted in him, something permanent. For decades, he believed keeping the peace between his sons meant staying neutral. But neutrality wasn't an option anymore, not when the family name was being used like a pawn in someone else's game. The next morning, I was back at the Titan office by 7 a.m. I went through sales reports, supplier contracts, even competitor trends across the Western region. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was building a future, one based on data and loyalty, not manipulation. By 9 a.m., I was on the phone with Vanessa from accounting. Her voice came through tight and tired. "Troy, thank God. Ethan's been impossible. The showroom's almost empty. We've got back orders piling up and customers are walking out." "I need a favor," I said. "Can you pull the last 3 years of sales data and customer satisfaction surveys, email it to my personal address?" She hesitated. Ethan's locked down, all access. Says the data's proprietary now. I paused, knowing what I was asking. Vanessa, you've been with us 12 years. You know what Dad built. I'm trying to protect that. A long silence followed. Then she whispered, "Give me an hour." By 10:15, my inbox lit up. It was all there. Sales figures, retention percentages, service return rates, pages of proof that the highest performing models were the ones Ethan planned to drop if he switched to Nova. More importantly, they were the ones customers loved. Customer satisfaction on those models averaged 93%. Return business, nearly 70%. With Nova, those numbers dropped below 50% in comparable dealerships. It wasn't just a bad move, it was suicide for a brand that had been built on trust. At 11:30, I printed everything, organized the proposal, and drove to Dad's house. I didn't call ahead. I knew he'd be there. He always came home from trips early when something didn't sit right. When I pulled up, his truck was in the driveway, and the garage door was open, revealing his old toolbox workbench and a framed photo of the original dealership lot, just 10 used cars parked on cracked pavement under a crooked wooden sign. I knocked once, then let myself in. He was at the kitchen table reading the same paperwork I'd handed him the day before. He looked up but didn't speak. I brought the full proposal, I said, setting the folder down. He opened it and scanned the first few pages. I walked him through every line: projected margins, exclusive inventory tiers, service retention strategies, and how Titan would support the dealership with marketing and allocation priority. Every piece of it built around the same foundation he started, with relationships, quality, and long-term trust. "These numbers are real?" he asked, finally speaking. "I've been tracking them for years. Every time a customer came back, it wasn't because we gave them a discount. It was because they felt remembered. That's what Ethan doesn't understand." He flipped to the final page, an implementation plan that would phase Ethan out and restructure the dealership under joint ownership with me. "He won't accept this," Dad said flatly. No, I agreed. He won't. "Then what's the point?" I looked him in the eye. "You still own the property. The building, the lot, it's all yours. Ethan owns the business. You can give him a choice. Either run it the right way, our way, or sell his share back to us. He keeps his license. We keep the Matthews name." He didn't respond right away, just stared at the numbers, at the legacy stretched out in ink and facts in front of him. Then he reached for his phone. "I need to make a call." I stood up. "I'll wait outside." 10 minutes later, he stepped out onto the porch. Martha's drawing up 3 documents. Ethan gets to choose. And that was it. No emotion, no long speech, just clarity, determination. A father who'd made his choice not for one son, but for the legacy he'd built with both hands and 100 Sunday mornings. 2 days later, we all sat in the conference room at Matthews Auto. Martha, Dad's attorney, laid the options out. Ethan sat across from us, jaw tight, not saying a word. Option 1. Martha said, sliding the first document toward him, "You stay on as owner, but under a new lease agreement, which includes maintaining Titan Motors as your exclusive supplier and upholding specific operational standards." Ethan didn't touch the paper. Option 2. She continued, "You sell your ownership share back to your father and brother at market value, minus any current losses from disrupted operations." He narrowed his eyes at me. "This is extortion. This is business," I said, repeating the very words he'd used when he fired me. Option 3. Martha said without pause, "You maintain ownership, but relocate the business. Your lease on this property terminates in 30 days. Ethan turned to Dad. "You'd really do this to your own son? You already did it." Dad said, voice low, "You fired your brother. You lied about it. You planned to destroy everything I spent 40 years building. So yes, I'd do this. I am doing this. Ethan stood up and paced, staring out the conference room window at the half-empty lot. The silence in the room wasn't tense. It was final. Then he turned back, looked down at the second document, and signed it. No arguing, no slamming fists, just pen on paper, and a chapter closed. That evening I walked the lot by myself. The wind was warm, summer coming in early. I passed a 2025 Titan SUV with a delivery tag still on the mirror. It wasn't just inventory, it was a promise kept. And there, taped to the glass inside the front door, was a temporary banner that read, "Coming soon, Matthews and Son." In that quiet moment, I knew we weren't done yet. There was still rebuilding to do, and one more conversation I wasn't ready for, because even after all this, I still hadn't spoken to Ethan, not really. And sooner or later, we'd have to face what came next. It had been 3 days since Ethan signed the paper and walked out without saying a word. He hadn't answered. Dad's calls hadn't responded to the email Martha sent, confirming the ownership transfer. Just silence. A quiet departure from the business he once insisted only he could modernize. Now all that was left of his version of the dealership were a few unused business cards and the echo of promises that never meant much to begin with. The lot was slowly coming back to life. Titan deliveries were back on schedule. Service appointments jumped 35% in a week. Longtime customers had started returning some just to say they were glad we were still around. They weren't just numbers in a CRM file. They were people who remembered Dad's voice, remembered me from the sales floor, and asked where the photos of our original location had gone. I put them back on the wall the next morning. But even with the momentum, there was something unfinished sitting in my gut. I hadn't heard Ethan's voice since that day in the conference room. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. He made his choices. But the truth was, unresolved blood doesn't settle like business deals do. It lingers. That Friday, Jack from Titan stopped by the new showroom. He walked the floor inspecting the new display layout and the fresh Titan signage above the service desk. We sat down in my office afterward with the numbers from the past 10 days. "You've got the best turnaround rate in the Western region right now," Jack said, flipping through the spreadsheet. "This kind of bounce back, especially after a transition this messy, that doesn't just happen. People trust the name," I said. "They just needed to see it meant something again." Jack gave a small nod, then leaned in. "There's something else you should know." Ethan applied for a senior manager position at one of Nova's dealership groups in Phoenix. I didn't respond at first. I wasn't surprised. If anything, it made sense. Ethan never planned to build something long-term. He liked fast results, short climbs. Nova would let him do just that. But the fact that he'd already moved on already cut ties. It landed differently than I expected. There was no apology, no conversation, just erasure. "Phoenix," I said, finally. "That far, huh? He didn't mention any of you in the interview. They called for a reference. We passed. Thanks for letting me know." Jack stood up, gave me a firm handshake. "You're doing the right thing here, Troy. This isn't about cars, it's about legacy. Don't forget that. If you've ever had to rebuild something while a part of you still felt broken family business trust, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Your experience might just help someone else feel less alone." That night I stayed late reviewing service surveys. One stood out, a handwritten note from a woman named Lorraine who had bought her last 3 cars from us. "Glad to see the heart is back in this place," she wrote. "It used to feel like home." I closed the file and sat in the dark for a while, the only light coming from the glow of the front lot. For all the progress we'd made, there was still one thing I hadn't done. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the contacts, until I found Ethan's number. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't call. I sent a text. I don't know if you care, but the dealership's back on track. Titan's supporting us and the community's coming around again. I wish we could have talked before all this. I hope Phoenix gives you what you're looking for. No bubbles appeared. No response came. The next morning I was out on the lot helping a young couple pick their first family car, a mid-sized Titan SUV with all the safety features. Dad walked by, holding a clipboard like he used to, smiling as he pointed out things most people wouldn't notice: wiper blade wear, tire alignment, that sort of thing. When the couple left, he turned to me and said, "The place feels different now. Lighter." I knew what he meant. We weren't just selling cars again. We were welcoming people back. But behind that smile, I could still see the weight on his shoulders, the quiet ache of a father who lost something between his sons. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" I asked. Dad took a deep breath. He might. But the question isn't if he comes back, it's whether he remembers why we started this place in the first place. That question stuck with me the rest of the day, because beneath all the spreadsheets and contracts and customer surveys, that was the one answer I still didn't have. Not from Ethan, not even from myself, and the only way to find it might require facing the one truth I'd been avoiding all along. The following Monday started like any other. Service bays opened at 7 a.m. Sharp, the showroom lights clicked on, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the break room. We had 4 appointments before noon, all returning customers. That used to be rare. Now it was becoming the norm again. Still, even with everything running smooth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Ethan hadn't replied to my message. No text, no call, not even a read receipt. And somehow the silence said more than words ever could. Mid-morning, Dad called me into his office. He'd taken over the smaller corner space, giving me the main office up front, the one that used to be his. It was symbolic, his way of passing the torch without ceremony. He slid a printed email across the desk. "Came through Martha this morning," he said. "It's from Ethan." I picked it up and read. It was short. No apology, no bitterness either. Just a formal notice relinquishing all future claims to the business and property, along with a single line, "At the end, I hope the place does better without me than it ever did with me." No signature, just his name in the email header. I handed the paper back. "Guess that's it." Dad looked at me for a long moment. "That's not the part that got to me," he said. "It's that line. You hear it?" "He's not angry," I said. "He's ashamed." Dad nodded slowly, and maybe that's worse. The rest of the day moved fast. We finalized the branding update with Titan Matthews and Son, was now officially listed on all regional directories. Jack sent through the promotional campaign assets. Billboards, service ads, local radio spots. The numbers looked promising. Projected growth over the next quarter was already 18% higher than what we forecasted under the old structure. Every sign pointed to success. But that night after closing, I stayed behind. I walked through each part of the building. The empty service bays, the quiet sales offices, the customer lounge. I stopped by what used to be Ethan's office. It had been cleaned out, stripped of any personality. Just an empty desk and a few outdated reports still pinned to the corkboard. I sat in the chair across from it, the same spot where I'd once been fired with a wave and a hollow explanation. "Too soft," he'd said. That word had stuck with me for weeks. It burned at first. But now it sounded like something I'd wear like a badge. Soft enough to listen, soft enough to build real trust, soft enough to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. Funny how the traits they criticize are the same ones that keep the foundation solid. If someone once told you you were too soft, too kind, or too slow, but those very qualities ended up saving something important, tell me about it in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs. As I stood up to leave, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Phoenix area code. I answered. "This is Troy." There was a pause. "Then it's Ethan." His voice was rough, quiet, different. I hadn't heard it in weeks, but it still landed in the same part of me that remembered Christmas mornings in the shop the first time we sold a car, together, the arguments over how to price a trade-in. "I got your message," he said. Didn't know what to say. "You don't have to say anything." Another pause. "I was wrong about a lot of things. Maybe everything, I know. I didn't expect you to build it back." He said, "Not like this." "It was never about proving you wrong," I said carefully. "It was about making it right." There was silence on the line, but it didn't feel hostile, just heavy. "I got a job offer from Nova," he added, "running operations for 3 of their locations. You gonna take it, I don't know. Part of me thinks I should. Start fresh. And the other part wonders if there's still room for me in the family that I walked away from." That hit harder than I expected. I turned away from the window and leaned against the desk. "You didn't just walk away," I said. "You tried to erase everything Dad built, and I won't lie, it hurt. All of it. But this place isn't just mine, Ethan. It never was." "I thought you'd hate me," he said. "I did, for a little while. And now I just hope you figure out what you're really chasing." We didn't solve anything on that call. No emotional reunion, no promises. But for the first time I heard something real in his voice. Not ambition, not ego, just uncertainty. And for Ethan, that was a kind of progress. After I hung up, I stepped back into the main showroom. Dad was wiping down the hood of a new Titan just like he used to when I was a kid. I didn't interrupt. He liked the ritual. And in that quiet moment, something finally settled. We hadn't fixed everything. We probably never would. But for the first time in months, the path forward didn't feel so heavy. The next morning, a manila envelope was waiting on my desk. No name, just a return address from Phoenix. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a dealership group badge clipped to it. No note, just the badge, snapped clean in 2. I stared at the broken badge for a long time. It wasn't just plastic. It was a message, Ethan's way of saying something he still couldn't bring himself to say out loud. He hadn't written a word, hadn't added a name, but the meaning was clear. He'd turned down Nova's offer. That was his clean break, sent in a quiet envelope from 600 miles away. Dad walked into my office just after 9 a.m. and saw the envelope on my desk. I didn't say anything, just slid the broken badge across the table. He picked it up, studied it, and gave a small nod. "He's trying," I said quietly. Dad didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Yeah, I guess he is." The next few weeks flew by. With the rebrand complete, we held an open house for the community. Free car washes, hot dogs on the Grill Titan, merchandise raffled off every hour. It wasn't about selling, it was about reconnecting. Customers came out in droves. Many brought their kids or even their grandkids, walking through the lot like it was a reunion more than a business event. The real surprise came when Lorraine, the woman who wrote that survey about the dealership, feeling like home again, showed up with her husband and 2 grown sons. One of them had just gotten engaged and wanted to buy a new car for his fiancée. We walked the lot together, and by the time we circled back to the showroom, they were ready to buy. Not just 1 car, 2. That's what trust looks like. Dad said later, watching them drive off in matching Titan models. You don't build that overnight, and you sure as hell don't keep it if you treat people like numbers. Business was strong, but that wasn't what stayed with me. It was the moments, the conversations, the familiar faces, the kids tugging on their parents' sleeves, saying, "I remember this place." That was the heartbeat of Matthews and Son, and it had started beating again. Then one morning, Ethan showed up. He didn't call, didn't text, just walked in through the front doors like it was any other Tuesday. I saw him through the glass, first button-down shirt, jeans, no tie. He looked different. Not tired, just stripped down, like someone who'd left something behind on purpose. "Morning," he said quietly, stopping a few feet from my desk. "Didn't think I'd see you this soon. Didn't think I'd come back," he admitted. "But I kept thinking about what you said, about figuring out what I'm really chasing." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You find an answer. Not the full one. But I know it's not Nova, or Phoenix, or some chain dealership where I don't even know the mechanics' names." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. It was the business plan he'd written 2 years ago, back when Dad was first talking about retirement. His original proposal to modernize the dealership. The plan he said I never supported. I rewrote it. He said, laying it on the desk. Same idea. Better values. I took out the part about dropping Titan. I added service retention follow-up strategy. Real customer relationships. I didn't touch it. Not yet. "I'm not asking for my job back," he added quickly. "I just thought you should see it. You once told me relationships are what keep this industry alive. Took me a while, but I get it now." That was the moment. The shift. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a dramatic apology. It was just honesty. And for Ethan, that was rare. If someone in your life finally owned their mistakes, not with excuses, but with humility, what did that change for you? Did it rebuild trust? Or just reopen wounds? Leave a comment. Your story might help someone wrestling with forgiveness. I reached for the paper and scanned it. The language was different, more grounded, more focused on people instead of just margins. He hadn't just rewritten a proposal, he'd rewritten his approach, slowly, deliberately. "You thinking about coming back full-time?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'd like to be part of it, even if it's just consulting, even if it's just Saturdays. I just want to help rebuild what I nearly broke." I studied him. The ego was gone. So was the defensiveness. In its place was something I'd never seen from him: humility, but not self-pity. Dad stepped into the office, then holding a parts invoice, but stopped when he saw Ethan. They looked at each other not with tension, but with history. Dad walked over, handed me the paper, and then turned to Ethan. "You staying for lunch?" he asked. Ethan blinked. "If that's okay. We've got leftovers from the open house. Mac and cheese, still warm." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." They left the office together. No apologies, no explanations. Just two men who had fought the same storm from opposite sides, finally walking in the same direction. I sat alone for a moment, looking down at the business plan, at the header, written in pen proposal, Matthews and Son V2.0. Maybe we weren't meant to pick up exactly where we left off. Maybe we had to build something new together out of everything we learned the hard way, and I had a feeling the next step would ask more from both of us than either had given before. Ethan started showing up on Saturdays. At first, he kept to the background, checking on service reports, helping the newer sales staff with CRM software he'd once insisted was outdated. He didn't act like a partner or an owner. He acted like someone trying to earn back something he couldn't name. I didn't ask questions, and neither did Dad. We just let him show up, and slowly the rhythm settled. Customers recognized him, of course. Some nodded politely. Others hesitated, clearly unsure what to make of his return. One older couple, longtime Titan buyers, walked in for their scheduled oil change and froze when they saw Ethan behind the counter. The husband muttered something about last time we came. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Ethan heard it. He didn't flinch, Just walked over, offered them coffee, and asked about their granddaughter's softball team. They stared for a second, surprised he remembered. Then they smiled. Trust doesn't come back in a moment, but sometimes it peeks through the cracks. By the third weekend, Ethan had begun drafting a new customer loyalty program based on follow-up service calls, not promotional gimmicks. He brought it into my office one afternoon, laid it on the desk, and said this isn't about getting people back. It's about giving them a reason to stay. I reviewed it. The metrics were solid, the approach surprisingly human. I added 2 notes, signed off, and we pushed it live. Within a week, returning service bookings jumped 12%. 2 weeks later, we had a 9% uptick in repeat inquiries from customers who'd bought vehicles within the last 18 months. That wasn't luck. That was trust, rebuilt one gesture at a time. Have you ever had to re-earn someone's faith after you lost it? What did it take? Did they ever really let you back in? I'd love to hear how that played out for you. Dad kept his distance from the logistics, but stayed active on the floor. He'd greet returning families, polish a hood or two, and disappear into the break room like a ghost with a clipboard. One afternoon, I found him standing in front of the old wall of photos we'd put back up. The original 10-car lot, Mom behind the parts counter with her red calculator. A young Ethan in a bow tie for his first big sale, even though it was just a family friend buying a trade-in. He looked at me and said, "Funny how you can forget who someone used to be until you see proof they're still in there." He wasn't talking about the photos, and he didn't need to. The real turning point came during a quarterly Titan distributor meeting. Jack invited me to speak on sustainable dealership growth through legacy branding. It was meant to be a 10-minute segment. I asked Ethan to join me on stage. He hesitated at first. "You sure?" he asked. Not everyone in that room's forgotten what I tried to do. I'm sure I told him, because what you're doing now matters more. We stood in front of a crowd of 50 regional managers and dealership owners. Ethan opened with a line I didn't expect. "If you're here looking for a quick win, I'm not the guy to listen to. But if you want to talk about fixing what you broke, then I've got a few things to share." That room went dead silent, then completely locked in. We walked them through the loyalty program, the new follow-up service model, and our strategy for customer retention that prioritized relationships over rebates. When the presentation ended, Jack stood up and said, "That's how you turn a mistake into a model." The highlight wasn't the applause. It was the look on Ethan's face afterward, still unsure, still humbled, but this time not carrying shame. Just acceptance. He wasn't trying to outrun who he had been. He was finally trying to live into who he could be. If you've ever stood in a room you didn't think you deserved to be in, but spoke anyway, how did it feel? Were you received? Or did it change you? Drop a comment. Someone might need your courage. That night we grabbed burgers at a little dive near the edge of town. Just the 2 of us. No dealership talk, just brothers. We laughed about old staff meetings, remembered the time we both sold cars to twin brothers, and forgot which one was which during follow-ups. At one point, Ethan looked across the table and said, "I think I hated this place because I thought it defined me. And now I think it's the first place I've ever really felt like myself." I didn't know what to say to that, but I didn't need to. We paid the tab, walked out into the night air, and drove home separately. But we were heading in the same direction now. The next morning, Ethan dropped a manila folder on my desk. Inside was a draft for a new mentorship program. He wanted to partner our senior team with local community college students interested in auto sales and service careers. This place gave us a chance, he said. Maybe it's time we gave one back. And just like that, we had our next step. Not just business, not just repair, but legacy shared, not claimed, carried, not controlled. The mentorship program took off faster than any of us expected. Within the first week, we had 9 applicants from the local community college, all studying either business administration or auto mechanics. Some of them had family ties to the dealership, sons and daughters of longtime customers, nieces of past employees. Others just wanted a shot at something more than flipping wrenches in someone else's garage. We didn't promise them full-time jobs. We promised them something better, a front-row seat to how a family business could rise, fall, and rebuild itself without losing its soul. Ethan handled the orientation. He walked the students through the showroom, talked about the balance between sales and service, and explained what we valued most: relationships, not revenue. At one point, he paused in front of an old framed photo on the wall. It was from the early days, Dad handing a set of keys to our first returning customer. Ethan looked at the group and said, "That was the day we stopped selling cars and started building trust." I forgot that once, but I won't forget again. The students didn't ask about titles or commissions. They asked how to handle angry customers, how to remember names, how to make people feel like they weren't just walking into a transaction, but into something personal. That was the point. We weren't just training employees. We were passing down values. If you've ever mentored someone, or been mentored by someone, how did it change the way you approached your work or your life? Share that story. It might inspire someone who's unsure if they're ready to lead. One of the students, Diego, stood out. He was quiet, observant, and asked more questions in the first 3 days than most of our junior staff did in a month. He wasn't polished, but he cared. One afternoon, a customer came in for an oil change and mentioned her check engine light had come on again. Our tech team was slammed, but Diego asked if he could run a diagnostic. He found a loose sensor in less than 10 minutes. The customer thanked him personally, and that night she left a 5-star review, naming him by name. Ethan caught the review first and printed it out, taping it to the break room bulletin board with the headline, "Not bad for week 1." The crew laughed. Diego blushed. And for the first time in a long while, the break room felt like more than just a place to eat. It felt like a team again. We decided to launch a second phase of the program, partnering with a local trade school to open weekend service clinics for low-income families. Basic maintenance, free of charge. First come, first served. We covered the cost through a small percentage of Titan bonus incentives and customer loyalty funds. It wasn't a big number on a spreadsheet, but the impact was massive. The first Saturday we opened the clinic, we serviced 14 cars. By the third Saturday, we were booked solid. One woman, a single mom with 3 kids, cried in the waiting area when she learned her brake repair was covered. Ethan was the one who handed her the invoice marked $0. He didn't say much, just nodded and said, "We're glad you came in." That moment stuck with me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Dad sat in the corner that day, sipping coffee from a travel mug and watching it all unfold. He didn't say much either, just gave me a small nod as we passed each other in the hallway. That nod meant everything. It was the kind of quiet approval you earn, not demand. The kind that tells you you're on the right path, even if it's been a long one. Have you ever been part of something small that made a big difference? Something local, something personal, something that reminded you of what really matters? Leave a comment. We need more of those reminders. One evening after we closed up, Ethan and I sat out front, watching the last rays of sun stretch across the parking lot. The lot was nearly full, not just with vehicles, but with people techs, finishing paperwork, students chatting about diagnostics, customers lingering in the warm dusk, talking about vacations and grandkids. You know, Ethan said, "I used to think success meant expansion. bigger numbers, more locations. Now I think maybe real success is just getting it right in one place. I nodded. Yeah, doing it right where it matters. He looked down, kicked at a pebble. Think Dad ever thought we'd end up here? I smiled. Not in a million years. He laughed, then grew quiet again. Still figuring it out, you know. Still not sure I deserve a seat at the table. You're not supposed to feel like you deserve it, I said. You just keep showing up and earning it. A truck pulled into the lot. Then an old customer from years back, bringing his daughter in for her first car. I stood up to greet them, and Ethan followed without hesitation. No script, no pitch. Just two brothers walking across the pavement, ready to do the job the way it should have been done all along. What came next wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in years, it felt like we were building forward, not just cleaning up what had been left behind. By the start of fall, the dealership had settled into something we hadn't felt in years: momentum without chaos. Sales were steady, service was booked 3 weeks out, and the mentorship program had expanded to include a quarterly scholarship funded by Titan's regional office. Jack called it a best practices case study, but we all knew it was more than that. It was a second chance with a paper trail. The real surprise came during our monthly Titan territory review. We ranked first in customer retention across 5 states, not just because we were selling better models, but because those same customers kept coming back for oil changes, trade-ins, and even coffee. Relationships were translating into revenue, and we had the numbers to prove it. I shared the report with the team at our Friday morning staff meeting. Ethan stood next to me, flipping through the data on the projector while I spoke. This didn't happen because of one program or one change, I told the room. It happened because people here decided that doing it the right way mattered more than doing it the fast way. One of the new hires, a tech named Mel, who'd come from a high-volume national chain, raised her hand. So what's the next move? Ethan looked at me, then turned back to the room. We make sure we don't forget how we got here. That's the move. That line landed deeper than I expected. It wasn't flashy. It was a reminder, and it echoed what Dad had told us years ago, sitting around the dinner table. Anyone can build something. Not everyone remembers why they started. If your work or your business has ever brought you back to a deeper purpose, something beyond the paycheck, tell me about it in the comments. You never know who needs to hear your story today. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside for a break and found Dad in his usual spot, sitting on a folding chair near the edge of the lot, watching traffic go by. It had become his ritual. No clipboard, no jacket, just a man in his 60s watching the business he built survive its second birth. He looked up and gave me a half smile. I saw the numbers. Good quarter. It's shaping up that way, I said, sitting next to him. He nodded, but that's not what matters most. No, I agreed. It's not. A few moments passed. Then he added, I talked to your mom last night. Told her I'm thinking about finally retiring for real this time. That caught me off guard. He'd always talked about retirement the way people talk about moving to the coast, more like a wish than a plan. You serious? He nodded slowly. You and your brother have figured out more than I ever did. And honestly, this place feels better now than it has in years. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything at first. He looked at me. Think you're ready to run it without me? I think we've been doing that for a while now, I said. He laughed. Yeah, but now it's official. We sat there, watching the sun stretch over the hood of a newly detailed SUV, its paint catching the gold of late afternoon. I realized then how different this moment felt compared to all those early years. There was no pressure to perform, no need to prove anything. Just calm, just clarity. Back inside, Ethan was helping Diego with a service estimate. They were both leaning over the counter, checking numbers, trying to figure out how to save the customer money without cutting corners. Ethan caught my eye through the glass and gave a small nod, the kind we'd both started using instead of words. The kind that said, "We're good." The mentorship program had expanded again now, including 2 part-time instructors from the local trade school. They used our service bays as live training labs every other Thursday. The community noticed. Parents who once bought minivans from us were now calling to ask if their kids could apply. Some days I had to stop and remind myself this was still the same business I walked away from not long ago. But it wasn't the same. Not exactly. It was cleaner now, less about ego, more about value. Not just customer value, but community value. What we were building didn't look like the old Matthews Auto. It looked like what it was always supposed to be. That night as we closed up, Ethan walked into my office holding a small wooden box. Inside were nameplates, old ones from desks, long retired. Ours, Dad's, even one that just said reception in faded brass. He set them on the desk. "I found these in the storage closet," he said. "Thought we could frame them for the lobby. You know, show where we came from." I picked up my old plate, Senior Sales Director. It felt like another life. "That's a good idea," I said. "Helps remind us this didn't start with digital ad campaigns and spreadsheets. No," he said, "it started with 2 parents and a dream and 10 cars on a gravel lot." We stood there for a long moment, not talking, just remembering. Then Ethan said, "Think we're ready for what's next?" I looked out the office window at the full showroom, the clean bays, the students in the back lot, washing cars, the 3 customers still chatting at the service desk, even after their paperwork was done. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I think we are." 6 months later, I stood alone in the showroom one quiet Sunday evening. The lights were dimmed, the doors locked, but I didn't feel alone. I could still hear faint laughter from earlier in the day, kids running between the cars, a couple celebrating a new lease, Ethan talking someone through their financing options like he'd been doing it for decades. The dealership felt full, even when it was empty, and I realized then this place wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to the people who walked through those doors and believed in it even when we didn't. I thought about everything that had happened, about how Ethan and I had once stood on opposite sides of this very room, each convinced we were right, about how we nearly lost everything our parents built, not because of failure, but because of pride. But failure, as I've learned, isn't falling down. It's refusing to stand back up in a better way. I'm not the same man who was fired on a Monday morning with a cardboard box in hand. I've learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet persistence. Sometimes it's knowing when to speak and when to listen. And sometimes it's choosing to lead with values even when it costs you the easy win. Ethan changed too. He stopped trying to outgrow the legacy and started helping shape it. And together we rebuilt something that might actually outlast us. If you've ever faced a moment that asked more from you than you thought you had family business forgiveness, I hope this story reminds you that it's never too late to do the right thing, and it's never too early to start again. Leave a comment and share what this story brought up for you. Whether it's something you've lived through or something you're still walking through, your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if stories like this mean something to you, stories that don't just entertain but speak to real life, real people, real choices, go ahead and subscribe. This channel is here for more than just drama. It's here to remind you that behind every business, every conflict, every family name on a sign, there's a human story worth telling.